part of this backup problem. But right now, I just want to use a dichotomy and explain it later. I want to divide human understanding into two kinds: classical understanding and romantic understanding. In terms of ultimate truth, a dichotomy of this sort has little meaning, but it is quite legitimate when one is operating within the classic mode, used to discover or create a world of underlying form. The terms classic and romantic, as Phaedrus used them, mean the following. A classical understanding sees the world primarily as underlying form itself. A romantic understanding sees it primarily in terms of immediate appearance. If you were to show an engine or a mechanical drawing or electronic schematic to a romantic, it is unlikely he would see much of interest in it. It has no appeal because the reality he sees is its surface. Dull, complex lists of names, lines, and numbers. Nothing interesting. But if you were to show the same blueprint or schematic, or give the same description to a classical person, he might look at it and then become fascinated by it because he sees that within the lines and shapes and symbols is a tremendous richness of underlying form. The romantic mode is primarily inspirational, imaginative, creative, intuitive. Feelings rather than facts predominate. Art, when it is opposed to science, is often romantic. It does not proceed by reason or by laws. It proceeds by feeling, intuition, and aesthetic conscience. In the Northern European cultures, the romantic mode is usually associated with femininity, but this is certainly not a necessary association. The classic mode, by contrast, proceeds by reason and by laws, which are themselves underlying forms of thought and behavior. In the European cultures, it is primarily a masculine mode, and the fields of science, law, and medicine are unattractive to women largely for this reason. Although motorcycle riding is romantic, motorcycle maintenance is purely classic. The dirt, the grease, the mastery of underlying form required all give it such a negative romantic appeal that women never go near it. Although surface ugliness is often found in the classic mode of understanding, it is not inherent in it. There is a classical aesthetic which romantics often miss because of its subtlety. The classic style is straightforward, unadorned, unemotional, economical, and carefully proportioned. Its purpose is not to inspire emotionally, but to bring order out of chaos and make the unknown known. It is not an aesthetically free and natural style. It is aesthetically restrained. Everything is under control. Its value is measured in terms of the skill with which this control is maintained. To a romantic, this classic mode often appears dull, awkward, and ugly, like mechanical maintenance itself. Everything is in terms of pieces and parts and components and relationships. Nothing is figured out until it is run through the computer a dozen times. Everything's got to be measured and proved. Oppressive, heavy, endlessly gray, the death force. Within the classic mode, however, the romantic has some appearances of his own. Frivolous, irrational, erratic, untrustworthy, interested primarily in pleasure-seeking, shallow, of no substance, often a parasite who cannot or will not carry his own weight. A real drag on society. By now, these battle lines should sound a little familiar. This is the source of the trouble. Persons tend to think and feel exclusively in one mode or the other, and in doing so to misunderstand and underestimate what the other mode is all about. But no one is willing to give up the truth as he sees it, and as far as I know, no one now living has any real reconciliation of these truths or modes. There is no point at which these visions of reality are unified. And so, in recent times, we have seen a huge split develop between a classic culture and a romantic counterculture. Two worlds, growingly alienated and hateful toward each other, with everyone wondering if it will always be this way. A house divided against itself. No one wants it, really, despite what his antagonists in the other dimension might think. With a single stroke of analytical thought, he split the whole world into parts of his own choosing. split the parts and split the fragments of the parts, finer and finer and finer, until he had reduced it to what he wanted it to be. Even the special use of the terms classic and romantic are examples of his knifemanship. But if this were all there were to him, analytic skill, I would be more than willing to shut up about him. What makes it important not to shut up about him was that he used this skill in such a bizarre and yet meaningful way. No one ever saw this. I don't think he even saw it himself. And it may be an illusion of my own, but the knife he used was less that of an assassin than that of a poor surgeon. Perhaps there is no difference, but he saw a sick and ailing thing happening, and he started cutting deep, deeper and deeper, to get at the root of it. He was after something. That is important. He was after something, and he used the knife because that was the only tool he had. But he took on so much and went so far, in the end his real victim was himself. Aware of these things, but not really conscious of them, unless there is something unusual, or unless they reflect something we are predisposed to see. We could not possibly be conscious of these things and remember all of them, because our mind would be so full of useless details, we would be unable to think. From all this awareness, we must select, and what we select and call consciousness is never the same as the awareness, because the process of selection mutates it. We take a handful of sand from the endless landscape of awareness around us, and call that handful of sand the world. Once we have the handful of sand, the world of which we are conscious, a process of discrimination goes to work on it. This is the knife. We divide the sand into parts, this and that, here and there, black and white, now and then. The discrimination is the division of the conscious universe into parts. The handful of sand looks uniform at first, but the longer we look at it, the more diverse we find it to be. Each grain of sand is different. No two are alike. Some are similar in one way, some are similar in another way, and we can form the sand into separate piles on the basis of this similarity and dissimilarity. Shades of color in different piles, sizes in different piles, grain shapes in different piles, subtypes of grain shapes in different piles, grades of opacity in different piles, and so on and on and on. You'd think the process of subdivision and classification would come to an end somewhere, but it doesn't. It just goes on and on. Classical understanding is concerned with the piles and the basis for sorting and interrelating them. Romantic understanding is directed toward the handful of sand before the sorting begins. Both are valid ways of looking at the world, although irreconcilable with each other. What has become an urgent necessity is a way of looking at the world that does violence to neither of these two kinds of understanding, and unites them into one. Such an understanding will not reject sand sorting or contemplation of unsorted sand for its own sake. Such an understanding will instead seek to direct attention to the endless landscape from which the sand is taken. And there are historic reasons for this. But history keeps happening, and it seems no harm, and maybe some positive good, to add to our historical heritage with some talk in this area of discourse. When analytic thought, the knife, is applied to experience, something is always killed in the process. That is fairly well understood, at least in the arts. Mark Twain's experience comes to mind, in which, after he had mastered the analytic knowledge needed to pilot the Mississippi River, he discovered the river had lost its beauty. Something is always killed. But what is less noticed in the arts, something is always created, too. And instead of just dwelling on what is killed, it's important also to see what's created and to see the process as a kind of death-birth continuity that is neither good nor bad, but just is. This oblique route is the only one to take. To describe his physical appearance, or the statistics of his life, would be to dwell on misleading superficialities. And to come at him directly would be to invite disaster. He was insane. and when you look directly at an insane man, all you see is a reflection of your own knowledge that he's insane, which is not to see him at all. To see him, you must see what he saw, and when you are trying to see the vision of an insane man, an oblique route is the only way to come at it. Otherwise, your own opinions block the way. There is only one access to him that I can see as passable, and we still have a way to go.
I've been going into all this business of analyses and definitions and hierarchies, not for their own sake, but to lay the groundwork for an understanding of the direction in which entire life pursuing a ghost. That was true.
The ghost he pursued was the ghost that underlies all of technology, all of modern science, all of Western thought. It was the ghost of rationality itself. I think in a figurative sense, that is true. The things I hope to bring to light as we go along are some of the things he uncovered. Now the times are such that others may at last find them of value.
No one then would see the ghost that Phaedrus pursued, but I think now that more and more people see it, or get glimpses of it in bad moments. A ghost which calls itself rationality, but whose appearance is that of incoherence and meaninglessness, which causes the most normal of everyday acts to seem slightly mad because of their irrelevance to anything else.
This is the ghost of normal everyday assumptions, which declares that the ultimate purpose of life, which is to keep alive, is impossible, but that this is the ultimate purpose of life anyway, so that great minds struggle to cure diseases so that people may live longer, but only madmen ask why. One lives longer in order that he may live longer. There is no other purpose. That is what the ghost says. But to say he thought and acted like a machine would be to misunderstand the nature of his thought. It was not like pistons and wheels and gears all moving at once, massive and coordinated. The image of a laser beam comes to mind instead. A single pencil of light of such terrific energy and such extreme concentration it can be shot at the moon, and its reflection seen back on Earth. He sought one specific distant target, and aimed for it, and hit it. And that was all. General illumination of that target he hit now seems to be left for me. In proportion to his intelligence, he was extremely isolated. There's no record of his having had close friends. He traveled alone, always. Even in the presence of others, he was completely alone. People sometimes felt this and felt rejected by it, and so did not like him. But their dislike was not important to him. His wife and family seem to have suffered the most. His wife says those who tried to go beyond the barriers of his reserve found themselves facing a blank. My impression is that they were starved for some kind of affection, which he never gave. No one really knew him. That is evidently the way he wanted it, and that's the way it was. Perhaps his aloneness was the result of his intelligence. Perhaps it was the cause. But the two were always together, an uncanny, solitary intelligence. This still doesn't do it, though, because this and the image of a laser beam convey the idea that he was completely cold and unemotional, and that is not so. In his pursuit of what I have called the ghost of rationality, he was a fanatic hunter. One fragment becomes especially vivid now of a scene in the mountains where the sun was behind the mountain half an hour, and an early twilight had changed the trees and even the rocks to almost blackened shades of blue and gray and brown.
And there 3 days without food.
His food had run out, but he was thinking deeply and seeing things, and was reluctant to leave. He was not far away from where he knew there was a road, and was in no hurry. In the dusk, coming down the trail, he saw movement, and then what seemed to be a dog approaching on the trail, a very large sheepdog, or an animal more like a husky, and he wondered what would bring a dog to this obscure place at this time of evening. He disliked dogs, but this animal moved in a way that forestalled these feelings. It seemed to be watching him, judging him.
Stared into the animal's eyes for a long time, and for a moment felt some kind of recognition.
Then the dog disappeared. He realized much later it was a timber wolf, and the memory of this incident stayed with him a long time. I think it stayed with him because he had seen a kind of image of himself. A photograph can show a physical image in which time is static, and a mirror can show a physical image in which time is dynamic. But I think what he saw on the mountain was another kind of image altogether, which was not physical and did not exist in time at all. It was an image, nevertheless, and that is why he felt recognition. It comes to me vividly now. Like that timber wolf on the mountain, he had a kind of animal courage. He went his own way with unconcern for consequences that sometimes stunned people, and stuns me now to hear about it. He did not often swerve to right or to left. I've discovered that. But this courage didn't arise from any idealistic idea of self-sacrifice, only from the intensity of his pursuit, and there was nothing noble about it. I think his pursuit of the ghost of rationality occurred because he wanted to wreak revenge on it, because he felt he himself was so shaped by it. He wanted to free himself from his own image. He wanted to destroy it because the ghost was what he was, and he wanted to be free from the bondage of his own identity. A real system. To speak of certain government and establishment institutions as the system is to speak correctly, since these organizations are founded upon the same structural conceptual relationships as a motorcycle. They are sustained by structural relationships even when they have lost all other meaning and purpose. People arrive at a factory and perform a totally meaningless task from 8 to 5 without question because the structure demands that it be that way. There's no villain, no mean guy who wants them to live meaningless lives. It's just that the structure, the system, demands it, and no one is willing to take on the formidable task of changing the structure just because it is meaningless. But to tear down a factory, or to revolt against a government, or to avoid repair of a motorcycle because it is a system, is to attack effects rather than causes. And as long as the attack is upon effects only, no change is possible. The true system, the real system, is our present construction of systematic thought itself, rationality itself. And if a factory is torn down, but the rationality which produced it is left standing, then that rationality will simply produce another factory. If a revolution destroys a systematic government, but the systematic patterns of thought that produce that government are left intact, then those patterns will repeat themselves in the succeeding government. There's so much talk about the system, and so little understanding. I've noticed that people who have never worked with steel have trouble seeing this, that the motorcycle is primarily a mental phenomenon. They associate metal with given shapes, pipes, rods, girders, tools, parts, all of them fixed and inviolable, and think of it as primarily physical. But a person who does machining or foundry work or forge work or welding sees steel as having no shape at all. Steel can be any shape you want if you are skilled enough, and any shape but the one you want if you are not. Shapes, like this tappet, are what you arrive at, what you give to the steel. Steel has no more shape than this old pile of dirt on the engine here. These shapes are all out of someone's mind. That's important to see. The steel? Hell, even the steel is out of someone's mind. There's no steel in nature. Anyone from the Bronze Age could have told you that. All nature has is a potential for steel. There's nothing else there. But what's potential? That's also in someone's mind. Ghosts. The steel? Hell, even the steel is out of someone's mind. There's no steel in nature. Anyone from the Bronze Age could have told you that. There's no steel in nature. All nature has is a potential for steel. There's nothing else there. All nature has is a potential for steel. There's nothing else there. That's also in someone's mind. But what's potential? Ghosts. That's also in someone's mind. Ghosts.